This is Leslie Chapman Henderson, President and CEO of FLASH, the nonprofit Federal Alliance for Safe Homes. I'll be your host today for our podcast, Strong Homes, Safe Families, where we help you prepare for disasters of all kinds. During our show, we're going to share tips, information, and interviews to help you protect your family and your home before Mother Nature heads your way. Today, we're talking about getting prepared for hurricane season with an emphasis on strengthening your home. So that means we're going to be talking about the importance of knowing what your options are when it comes to hurricane shutter protection. I'm delighted to welcome our guest, Tim Robinson, Managing Partner of Global Protection Products and President of the International Hurricane Protection Association. Welcome, Tim.
Thank you, Leslie. I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you and look forward to this presentation.
Great. So, Tim, you have an incredibly interesting story of how you ended up in this industry of hurricane shutters. Can you tell me a little bit about yourself and your background and what got you on the path to where you are now?
Well, unlike a lot of kids as they're growing up, they always come up with, ideas on what they want to be when they get old. My vision was not to be a shutter person. Vision was I wanted to be a fireman, like a lot of kids, right? Everybody loves a fireman. And so that was my vision. I wanted to be a firefighter. And I fulfilled that. I actually became a firefighter shortly after I got out of school. And as it goes, I, on my days off from the fire department, because we worked on 24-hour shifts, I worked 24 hours and then I was off for 2 days, as a lot of firefighters do. They have second jobs. And my second job was I got into the hurricane shutter industry and began installing and servicing shutters. And later on in that cycle of being a firefighter and doing that on my days off, I kind of came to a crossroads where I had the opportunity to more or less get more into the shutter industry in a management type role. And I made the decision to leave the fire service and get into the shutter business. And here I am today.
So you basically started your career protecting people. And now through the work you're doing, you're continuing to protect people. And where are you located?
Me personally, I live in South Florida on the East Coast in the Fort Lauderdale area. But our company is a Florida-based company, and we have 4 locations around the state.
So June 1st is around the corner, and we're trying to help all of our listeners get ready for hurricane season. And there's really nothing that we talk more about when we talk about strengthening your home and protecting your home than hurricane shutters. Okay. But we hear it called something else as kind of a broader category, and people call it opening protection. So Tim, when we talk about opening protection, what kind of openings on my house am I protecting?
Well, primarily you're looking at your glazed openings, which would be your windows, your sliding glass doors, any hinge door that you have that have glass in it. But you also want to take into consideration any older doors that may not be impact rated as well.
Ooh, that makes a lot of sense because these things change over time, don't they? The way that we build these different products?
Yes, over time, the codes have changed, the requirements have changed, and the testing requirements for these different products have changed. So you always want to make sure that you have an impact rated door, or of course, obviously you can use impact rated windows as well. So when we talk about opening protection, we're not always talking about shutters. You could have a impact resistant window as well.
So you're going to test opening protection, which is basically, in almost all cases, we're talking shutters, unless it's an impact resistant window or something, which we're not talking about today. But how do you test a shutter for impact and wind resistance? What do they do?
There's 2 different things. We have to wind cycle test them, and we also have to impact test them, where they fire a 2x4 out of a cannon at the product at 50 feet per second, or the equivalent of about 35 miles an hour.
And what is that approximating? Is that things like in a hurricane, if a limb comes off or a piece of roofing? And is that what a 2x4 is for?
Yeah, it could be any type of flying debris that's left outside. I mean, you could be talking about chairs, like you said, roofing, shingles or cement tile or mailboxes or anything that's outside that potentially can be tree limbs, of course, but can be broken off or come off of whatever it's attached to and become what we call flying debris.
Okay, so let's talk about the different types of shutters. Let's just say whatever, obviously everything we're talking about will be tested and approved to the standards that you described with the method that you described. And again, I'm a homeowner and I'm trying to figure out, I'm going around my house and I'm thinking, okay, I've got some windows, I have a door, I have no idea if it's a newer or an older door, if it's impact resistant or not. And I need to kind of figure out what my options are. So let's talk first about galvanized steel or aluminum panels. What are they? How are they mounted? And then we can talk a little bit about how much they cost.
The galvanized steel, the aluminum panels, they're primarily the same thing. They're corrugated. Most of them these days have about a 2-inch rise, and they are typically about anywhere from 14 to 15 inches wide, and then they're cut to length based on the application. As far as how they're mounted, there's a variety of different ways to mount them. From a very simple, what we call direct mount application, which is just some anchors in the wall that they attach the shutters to, more user-friendly applications where you have tracks, headers that they can slide into. And in a lot of cases, you don't even need a ladder to install the shutters.
And are they heavy?
They're heavy, and that's kind of where the two differences in the aluminum and the steel is, of course, depending on the areas of the country that you live in, there's different requirements by code. So you have, again, primarily there's two types of steel shutters. There's a 24 gauge galvanized steel and a 20 gauge galvanized steel, and then your aluminum shutter. And the real primary difference between those is the weight.
And so the aluminum would be the lightest?
The aluminum would be the lightest, although it's not a real huge difference. But to kind of put it in perspective for you, a foot of a panel of 20 gauge steel weighs about 2.5 pounds per foot. If you had an 8-foot panel, you're talking about 20 pounds.
Is that when a customer makes a decision between the two different types, is weight a big part of that decision?
Usually when you're making a decision between the steel and the aluminum, the weight would be the primary reason for those two products. As you said in the beginning, they're tested. They're all tested to the same standard. So it really just becomes down to the user preference. And in this case, on those two products, it would be the weight.
And what about the cost? Are the steel more cost effective or affordable than the aluminum?
Yeah, the steel shutters would be your really basic entry-level shutter, and then the aluminum shutter would go up typically a couple dollars per foot. Shutters are priced in a per foot or per square foot price range because the finished product is about 12 inches wide, so it's a lineal foot or a square foot price. So your galvanized steel would be your cheapest or least expensive. And then the aluminum shutter would be probably a couple dollars more per foot.
So without locking you into it, but just for illustrative purposes, let's say I did the steel on my front door and it's just a normal size door. And what would that cost, or what's a range of cost for that approximately?
So let's say like a standard 3-foot wide door, 7 feet tall. It would be 6'8", but you have to have a little overlap of the shutters. So you're looking at about 21 square feet, 22 square feet roughly. In your basic direct mount application, you're probably talking in the range of maybe $100 to $120 to cover that door.
Would that include the installation or just the basic material cost?
That would be an installed price. And, these products typically are available at your store. So if you're handy and you're a do-it-yourself person, you certainly could do that yourself and probably trim some of that cost.
I think that cost is surprising in its affordability. Have the prices of shutters, and after Hurricane Andrew in 1992, when the requirements started, being put in place to require shutters in different regions, coastal, windborne-free regions, et cetera, is it typical, like other products, where at the first phase of the market, it's at one cost, but over time, the costs come down? Has that happened with shutters?
There's a lot of things to take into consideration right after Andrew, when the codes started being developed. the cost of getting a product tested. There was a lot going into it. And to be honest, back then, everybody really went to a material that they knew would meet the standard. And then after that, they started trying to use thinner materials, but still met the standard. So that helps to drive the cost down. Of course, steel is a commodity, so the price of shutters kind of goes with the price of steel market. So there's a lot of different factors there, but and then obviously everything else considered, you have to take competition into consideration as well, obviously.
Okay, so let's talk about that same door, 6'8" by 3 foot wide standard door, and let's talk about the approximate installed cost of the aluminum.
So your aluminum, like I said, it would probably go up a couple dollars a foot. So, my price that I kind of used as a ballpark was $5 to $6 a foot for the steel. So now you're looking at more of like a $7 to $8 per square foot for aluminum. And again, your real only advantage there is the difference in the weight. As far as performance, both products perform the same, use the same type of fasteners and hardware to deploy the shutter. So your only real advantage there is the weight of the shutter.
So you're going to have to get your calculator and help me here, because we're going to build a nice table out of these prices, because this is super helpful for homeowners, especially as they're just getting started. So we've got, you said approximately 21 square feet for the door. The range installed for the steel is 100 to 120. And then for aluminum, it goes up You got 5 to 6 for the steel and 7 to 8 for the aluminum. So what's our range, you think, for the aluminum?
So you're looking probably about a 140 to 160 price range for aluminum.
So that's for my door. And we're just going to keep coming back to that door, because I think it's a great way to do the comparison. It's really, really helpful.
Okay.
All right. So we've got 2 different types of metal panels. And we talked about different installation methods. And thank you in advance. I know you're going to provide us with some pictures that we're going to put with the notes for this podcast, so we can show people exactly what we're talking about as we move through. The next one we want to talk about is a clear storm panel or polycarbonate storm panel. Do you want to tell us a little bit about those?
Yeah, so the clear storm panel, that's popular with the folks that think they want to be able to see outside during a hurricane. And as you know, the reality is nobody really wants to see what's going on while that storm is blowing. But one of the advantages to the clear polycarbonate shutter is obviously they allow light in. So when you use a galvanized or aluminum storm panel, it gives the blackout effect when the whole house is shuttered. So you're really in the dark. The clear shutters obviously allow light through, as well as allowing you to see outside, so you don't feel that cave feeling. Some of the limitations with the polycarbonate shutter is they don't have the same spans. So the door that you keep referring back to would not be a problem to cover that with a clear panel. But if you were talking about a bigger opening, a big sliding glass door or something of that nature, sometimes the limitations on the polycarbonate shutters just don't allow for that.
And there's nothing to say, right, that you couldn't use different types of material panels for different parts of your home, correct?
That's true. You could use a clear shutter on some of the smaller openings, and you could use steel and aluminum or aluminum or any other of these products that we're going to talk about today. You can mix and match, and it's commonly done.
Okay, so since you said we could cover our same door with our 21 square foot need with polycarbonate panel, what would be the cost range for that?
Okay, so on a clear shutter, you're talking probably about $8 to $10 a square foot. So now your same 21 square foot opening, you're talking about 170, somewhere between 170 to 195 for a clear storm panel.
So that's super helpful. And before we move on, we've got some more we're going to talk about. I want to just make sure everybody understands when we talk, and this is from, our organization. We've talked to consumers for 22 years, and it gets a little confusing because people say, wait a minute, how could a metal panel and a clear polycarbonate panel, be comparable? And I think when we talk about performance testing, what I like to tell people is, hey, if it's a popsicle stick, as long as it performs and withstands the missile test, it's going to pass the test. It's not so much about the material, it's about the performance. And I think that's a really critical point to make because people get confused by that. And I bring that up because the next thing we're going to talk about is fabric. And this is really surprising to a lot of people. So can you tell us about fabric panels and how they're made?
Okay, yeah, sure. There's a lot of different type of fabrics out there. We have our own fabric, which is a polypropylene material. It's a woven material. And in our case, it gets 3 layers of this material get laminated together. Sounds thick when I say that, but we're talking about a finished product of maybe somewhere between 1/8 of an inch to 3/16 of an inch thick. So it's not that thick, but you get these 3 layers laminated together. And then the mounting, the way it mounts is very similar to the storm panels that we were just talking about, where they mount on 2 sides, right? The top or the bottom or from side to side. So on a fabric curtain would be 1 curtain. So that same door that we've been talking about would require 3 panels to cover that door. A fabric shutter would be just 1 piece of fabric, and it would have grommets in 2 sides of it. Depending on the type of construction that you have and the mounting conditions, you would either put the anchors at the top and bottom or on both sides of the opening.
And are those opaque, or is there some translucence to the?
They are a white material. So you cannot see through the material, but it is translucent. It does allow light in. So you kind of get that effect of not being blacked out or in a cave feeling. You have the light, but you don't see outside. So it's a little bit of both.
Oh, that's nice. That makes sense. And obviously they are very lightweight as well, especially compared to metal. I guess the one thing I always think about with the fabric is if Kevlar can stop a bullet, right? Then fabric can stop a hurricane missile.
Yeah, and when some of the early fabric shutters came out, like we were talking about a few minutes ago, some of them actually had Kevlar in them, but they were cost prohibitive because of that. So again, industry just continued to work on it and come up with a affordable product that again met the test standard and is able to pass the test.
Okay, we're moving on and moving up. Tell us about accordion shutters.
Okay, so the accordion shutter, when I talk about accordion shutters and we talk about manufacturing them, the accordion shutter is more of what I refer to as an assembly of a shutter because they're all made from aluminum extrusions that get cut to size based on the size of the opening. Then they get screwed together and become one system that gets mounted on the house. So far we talked about fabric and storm panels. Those would be stored in the garage or utility room or someplace in the house, but not pre-mounted on the house. Your fasteners would be pre-mounted, but those shutters would not be. Once you start talking about an accordion shutter, the entire system is mounted on the house. And in this case, again, going back to your front door, you're going to have the shutter would have mounted on the opening. It would have a couple slats on each side of the opening that you would just literally close, thinking of an accordion that you would pull together in the center and it would lock closed. Very easy to deploy.
And so they're pretty much custom crafted to each opening that they protect and then permanently mounted. So you just have to pull them closed and go from there. And are some of those motorized?
Accordion shutters, no. Typically they're all manual. They're very easy to operate though. They have wheels at the top, nylon wheels. And as far as the appearance on the house, they come in 4 basic colors. Industry standard is you can get it in white, bronze, beige, or ivory would be the 4 colors that you can pick. That's kind of an industry standard. Obviously, beyond that, you can get custom painted shutters, but obviously it starts to affect the price.
I would imagine. So if we're going to cover our front door with an accordion, what's our cost range on that?
So your accordion price range, depending on where you live and the competition levels, can range anywhere from probably $18 to $24 a square foot. So you're starting to get up there. Obviously, a lot of advantages to the shutter being permanently mounted on the house. But if we go with the lowest number there, the $18 a square foot, you're looking at about $375.
All right. So moving on now to the one that may be a motorized option, and that is the roll shutter.
Correct. So the roll-up shutter, that comes in a lot of different options, a lot of different variations of operating. The roll-up shutter would typically have a housing at the top of the opening where the aluminum slats from the roll-up shutter are housed, and then just have a track on each side of the opening. And you can operate those shutters they have spring-loaded shutters, so you can just reach up, pull it down with your hand, pull it down and lock it at the bottom. Or you can have a manual crank where you can crank it from the inside or the outside. And then you can go to an electric option where it's motorized. You can get crazy. You can have them where you have remote controls. You can have them even, quite honestly, where they're wind driven. You could put a wind meter on it and they close themselves when the wind starts blowing at a certain speed.
Oh, wait a minute. So kind of like your rain gauge on your sprinklers that tells it not to turn on when it's raining, you can put a wind gauge on your shutter?
It's like when you're going car shopping, Leslie, you can get some really neat options with these shutters when you start getting into these higher end shutter systems.
So this would be the kind of shutter that would tie into a smart home system. Say maybe you're not in Florida where your shutters are open and not deployed, but there's a hurricane coming. Is this something where you could use your smartphone to deploy them?
And there's cases where we've done that exact installation. The things that I always warn people about when it comes to that is when you're operating a shutter like that, they're dependent on going to the ground or to the stopping point for that particular shutter. So we're talking about a front door here, not really an issue, but let's say we had this on our back patio and we had some furniture out there and somebody had moved a chair into the opening, the shutter would come down on the chair, and you may not realize that if you're operating it remotely. So those are some of the things you have to take into consideration. Had a situation with one customer where when I brought that to his attention, he installed a camera system on each opening so he could watch the shutter come down. So
that's exactly what I was thinking, is this would be a great place to put a camera so that you could make sure that it did what it was supposed to do. And again, as our homes become smarter and smarter, I have a feeling though that this one being smart also comes with an increased price. So how about back to our modest little front door with the 21 square feet? What are we talking about cost range wise?
Well, when you start talking about roll shutters, I would tell you that a low end price is probably about $35 a square foot, and a high end price could get up into the $50 a square foot. And that would be dependent on some of those options that you're picking, whether you're going to go with a basic spring-loaded shutter that you just pull down, or you're going to go with the top shutter with a motorized remote control or some of those other features. So just talking again, a basic pull-down type shutter, you're looking at, for that same front door, probably about $725 to $750 price range.
One of the things we should stop and talk about before we talk about the last kind here is that in many places, having these shutters is an investment, but you might get a little bit of return on investment through insurance savings. Is that something that your customers are thinking about when they buy shutters, is that they can get an annual discount on their homeowner's insurance?
I think, yes, that everybody always takes that into consideration, that most insurance policies now do offer some discount for having shutter systems and things of that nature. So, yes, that's always a consideration for the homeowner.
Okay, so my last category I have here is kind of a hybrid. I have Hinged-colonial and Bahama kind of together. Can you tell us about those?
Yeah, essentially those two shutters are really the same shutter, and the difference is how they mount on the home. So a Bahama shutter is mounted, it actually sits over the window, and it's used not only for functionality of during hurricane for protection, but also it controls light and offers some security in the sense of people being able to see in the house and things of that nature. A lot of times they are used for trying to achieve a look on a house, the aesthetics. So you have something for looks and functionality there. And then the Hinged-colonial, again, it's made the same way. It looks the same. It just mounts to the sides of the window. And then when you're going to deploy that shutter, you swing it closed over the opening and lock it in place.
Oh, and I think people probably are pretty familiar with what those look like. But again, we're going to have photos embedded in the notes from this podcast so everyone can see exactly what we're talking about. So those shutters, if that's what we were putting on our front door, are they the same cost range?
They run, quite honestly, they run in the same price range as a roll-up shutter. It's more of it's kind of the look of, when you're talking about a roll-up shutter, that's primarily for one function, which is protecting your home.
So if we had an oddly shaped window that was approximately 21 square feet, you think it would be the same cost range as the roll shutter, the $725 to $750 without bells and whistles?
Yes, exactly. There really are no bells and whistles with those type of shutters. So yeah, you're in that. Typically, the difference, all the other shutters up to the Bahama and the Hinged-colonial that we talked about, they're usually those four colors that we talked about, the beige, the bronze, the ivory, and the white option. With these Bahamas and Hinged-colonials, as we manufacture those, the materials that we use are unpainted, what we call mill finish. So the advantage of these shutters is the homeowner can go and pick any color that they want to accent their house. And then we sent those shutters out to be painted that color very specifically. So that's the trade-off option that you get with that higher end shutter too.
And those are also
made out of aluminum, yes.
Wow. This is, after all the years that I've been doing this is the best and most comprehensive A to Z on hurricane shutters I've ever had the pleasure of having it. I'm so excited to share it with our listeners. Before we wrap up, I want to just ask you, across the time that you've been working and helping protect people's homes with shutters, is there any real lesson learned after storms or before storms or at any other time of this that you could just put out there to these folks if they have shutters? What is the thing that maybe there's an aha or a myth or something that they need to know that you can save them some grief maybe by sharing with them today?
Well, I would tell you that probably in my 30 plus years that I've been doing this now, the biggest issue that I see and kind of the heads up I could give to anybody, regardless of the type of shutter system that you have, is you have to maintain it. So many people get shutters installed or buy a property that already have shutters installed, and they just think that they're going to be able to go out and operate that shutter system without having done any maintenance over the years. As you know, we can go in certain areas, they go long periods of time without having any storm threats and not having the need to deploy their shutters. So my biggest warning and heads up that I could give to anyone is do maintenance on a regular basis on your shutter system, even from the simplest shutter system, the direct mount applications, which is, lubricate your fasteners to make sure that when you go to back them out to install your shutters, that they actually aren't frozen into the anchor in the wall, and you're able to do that. And all the way to these roll shutters or accordion shutters, they all require some simple maintenance. Doesn't even necessarily have to be done by a professional. The homeowners can, if they're, handy, they can do it themselves, but they need to do that maintenance.
Thank you for that. That's a great reminder that I'm certain the goal with getting ready for hurricanes is no surprises, and that will help get people to that. So before we go, I want to mention, Tim, that our organization, Flash, the nonprofit Federal Alliance for Safe Homes, is so grateful to you because in addition to being a really great educator and sharing your time and your information with us, you have also been a donor to our Strong Homes rebuilding project, where we're helping support families affected by Hurricane Michael who are rebuilding from the ground up in coordination with a whole bunch of different volunteer organizations like UMCOR and other national voluntary organizations active in disasters like MDS. And I just want to thank you for donating shutters to those homes, because those people who have been through that Category 5 storm really don't want to face another season without a protected home. And because of you and GPP, they're not going to have to. So I just want to say thank you for that and just applaud your efforts for giving back.
Thank you. We appreciate it. I will tell you that when you approached us with this project, my partner and I, there were no no hesitation. It was a no-brainer for us to help out, and we're just happy to be one small part of a lot of people that are volunteering and coming together for this project.
Oh, that's fantastic. Okay, so I want to thank our guest again, Tim Robinson with GPP and the IHPA, and thank all of you for listening to our episode of Strong Home Safe Families. I want you to visit us at hurricanestrong.org and make sure you take advantage of our free checklists and information about things like hurricane shutters and the other preps you can do to protect your family and home. Our content's available in English and Spanish, and you can also call us toll-free. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, share, and provide us a review on iTunes. Until next time.